Hello again. I am absolutely addicted to reading this sci-fi story. Um, so despite the fact that the last video I posted of it um, is either yesterday or 2 days ago, depending on how I decide to do this posting schedule, um, I'm actually just reading more of it on the exact same day, as you can tell by the fact that I'm wearing the exact same shirt. Um, yeah, so I'm just gonna do more of that because it's fun. And we're about to get to a really good part. So, here we go. The small room in the back of the club looked exactly the same as it had the week before. The Hulk, Alan, and Annika, sitting on the far side of the table, watching as Minami and Daniel entered. Alan brightened considerably when the door closed behind them. Well, what do you know? Tight-ass Gonzalez decided to come back. You are not helping, Minami said, sitting down carefully. The black pants she was wearing were little more than leggings, and the sleeves of her black shirt had slits running down their length. Daniel sat as well, the slick fabric of the new white shirt Minami had bought him feeling slimy against his skin. The Hulk snorted. Looks like he's none too happy about being here, though. Would you be, with Alan in the room? Minami asked, smiling as she removed the slim case from her purse. Ha ha! Ho ho! You're so funny, Alan said. His attention turned to Daniel. How'd she convince you to come back? I thought for sure you were out. Daniel shrugged. Said I could take a swing at you, he said. Everyone stared at him for a moment. Kidding, he clarified. I was kidding. The Hulk chuckled, a sound like a rock fall. What are you laughing at? Alan snapped. Enough, Annika said. The conversation stopped. Minami handed out the little plastic bags. Everyone poured the sugar onto their tongues and sat back while it dissolved. So, Annika said at last, I suppose I can assume from your presence, Daniel, that you've decided to join our cause. Daniel nodded. For better or worse, I guess I'm in. Good. Then let's talk business. Project 9441, Minami said, leaning her elbows on the table. Alan, what have you got? Alan shrugged. Not much more than last time. My source says that's the place to start, but doesn't tell me a whole lot else. I was hoping Hacker Guy here could work his magic fingers and get to the bottom of it. Not a hacker, Daniel said. And yeah, I'm friends with the guy whose project it is right now. I haven't had a chance to look into it, though. I'm pretty closely monitored at the NDC. We all are. And did you ask Brian for the password? Minami asked. Daniel sighed. I didn't, exactly, but I think he told me anyway. It's worth a shot. So, you guys really don't know what the project is? Not a clue, said the Hulk. Who's this source, then? Daniel asked Alan. And how do you know you can trust them? Alan shook his head. Don't question the con man, Danny. I have my ways. Where the information came from is beside the point, Annika cut in. The fact remains that Project 9441 is our only lead at this stage, and none of us has as good an opportunity to look into it as you do, Daniel. I'll see what I can do, he said, still discomfited by the intensity of Annika's stare. He began to get the feeling that perhaps her ferocious energy was less conviction and more obsession. Seems like this is going to be a pretty short meeting, then, Alan said, unless somebody else has any relevant info. Minami shrugged. You guys might want to keep closer watch on your butlers, she said. Daniel's been having issues with his, and after hearing about it, I've been watching mine more closely, too. It's been acting really weird, and I'm pretty sure it's spying on me. Well, of course it has, Alan said, giving the impression of an eye roll through his dark glasses. That's what they're for. You know you can turn them off for good if you want, right? You can? Said Daniel, surprised and hopeful. Well, it's not technically speaking legal, Alan continued, but it can be done. Daniel shook his head. Last thing I want is to draw more attention to myself. I got scheduled for a mandatory psychiatric evaluation today. The room went a little quieter than Daniel had been expecting. What? Said the Hulk eventually. Uncomfortable, Daniel replied. Yeah, they just said it was a mandatory quarterly evaluation, but my coworkers didn't know anything about it. Well, looks like we need a new coder, Minami, Alan said. Maybe you can get us one a little faster this time. Minami glared at him. We don't need a new coder, Alan. So they're keeping an eye on Daniel, so what? They're keeping an eye on all of us. He has something like 6 red flags as it is. And he's not stupid. He's not going to give us away. Isn't he? Said Annika quietly. No, Daniel objected hotly. He isn't. She nodded, once. Take care and don't draw any more attention, and things should be fine, she said. How soon can you look into Project 9441? Daniel shrugged. Tomorrow? Tonight? If Brian's there, I can wait till he goes to lunch or something and use his computer. Even as he said it, he began to get a sick feeling in the pit of his stomach. The thought of what might happen if he got caught, the consequences for both Brian and himself, scared him more than he was willing to admit. That would be best. What would you say your odds are of getting caught doing this? Shrugging again, he replied, I don't know, like 10%? We fool around on each other's computers all the time, Brian and me. Nobody will think it's weird. His shrugs were beginning to feel more like squirming. Good. Do it then. Annika turned her gaze to the Hulk. Any leads on your uncle? Minami leaned over and muttered into Daniel's ear. The Hulk's uncle was the most recent vanishing. He got the news a little over 2 months ago. We weren't close, the Hulk said. If Daniel hadn't known better, he would have thought an embarrassed flush came to Minami's cheeks. And yeah, 1 or 2. What? Alan objected. Why didn't you tell me? The Hulk gave Alan a withering glare. Maybe because our house, like every house, is bugged all to hell. Maybe that's why, Alan. Oh, well, thank God, Alan sighed. I thought maybe you didn't love me anymore. Fuck off, Alan. Annika cleared her throat, quietly, still watching the Hulk with those gleaming black eyes. He quieted, shifted in his seat, and continued. I asked my aunt about it. Uncle Bayani wasn't having an affair. Well, not that she knew about, Daniel said, quite before he realized what he was saying. The temptation to cover his mouth with his hand was almost overwhelming. The Hulk glared at him. No, he said. My uncle wasn't having an affair. But you don't know that, Daniel pointed out. The Hulk's hand came down on the table, hard. Daniel half expected the wood to crack with the force of the blow. He himself jumped about a foot in the air. I do know that, the Hulk growled, leaning over the table at Daniel. I've checked the time tickets, the security cameras, hell, even the tracker in his phone. The woman they said he killed lived in New Detroit. He hadn't left this city for at least 4 months. He never called the woman. He never mailed her, never saw her, never met her. My uncle was not having an affair. Okay, Daniel said weakly, holding his hands up, palms out. I believe you. He wasn't having an affair. In all this footage, Minami said, did you manage to snag any clues about what he was looking into? The Hulk's face darkened. Just scraps here and there, he replied. I only managed to get one concrete piece of information that I'm sure is connected to this. Being? Annika asked. Just one word. Phoenix. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Phoenix? He asked. Like the city? Don't know, said the Hulk. Could be. So what does it have to do with anything? The Hulk shrugged, settling back into his chair. Maybe nothing, he answered cagily. Maybe everything. I'll ask my informants, Alan said. Could be they know something about it. Like what it even is? Daniel said. Quit it, Daniel, Minami snapped. You haven't been here long, so maybe you haven't picked up on it, but we don't laugh at other people's info. We've all lost people we love, and any lead is valuable. So just stop. Sorry, said Daniel, going red all over. Didn't mean to cause offense. He's right, though, the Hulk said. It's not much of a lead so far. I'll run with it, Alan said. Then it'll be something. Probably covered in shit, the Hulk grumbled. Enough, said Annika. This meeting has gone on long enough. Unless anyone has anything relevant to add, we'll end here. Daniel's an ass, Alan asserted. Let the minutes reflect. The Hulk put a heavy hand on Alan's head. The heel of his hand touched one ear, and the tips of his fingers brushed the other. Not now, the Hulk said. Well then, said Minami. Off we go. Come on, Daniel, let's get you home. She stood and took his arm. He rose as well, feeling sheepish and guilty. Earplugs in, Minami reminded him. He had just managed to stuff the orange cones back into his ears when she opened the door to the room, and the breaking waves of sound from the club crashed over him. Friday morning dawned gray and rainy, the first scheduled precipitation since winter. Daniel dug his raincoat out of his closet before heading to work. He walked the whole way there, although he knew he would be late, resolving to work late that evening to make up for it. The truth was, he didn't particularly care about his actual work anymore. His mind was stuck, revolving like a broken record, about how he was going to look into Project 9441. Despite what he'd told the backroom group, he was incredibly nervous about being caught fooling around on Brian's computer. Best case scenario, he thought, was that Brian caught him, and he did a lot of explaining. When he arrived at the office, Brian's purple head was obscuring his computer screen. Daniel waved to him on his way by, but he was too focused on his work to notice. 5 p.m. came and went. Daniel left the office, waving again to Brian on his way out. Brian glanced up at him and gave a wan smile, rubbed his eyes, and took out his headphones. Hey, Daniel, he said tiredly. Hey, Brian, Daniel said. How long have you been here? Said Brian. Too long, Daniel filled in. Want to get dinner? It's raining, Brian complained. So, we'll go somewhere close. Brian sighed. Yeah, give me 5 minutes to wrap up. Sure, whatever. 20 minutes later, Daniel walked over and shook Brian's shoulder. Hey, he said. It's been 20 minutes, dude. Ah, shit, said Brian. Okay, I'm saving. Closing it down. Okay, let's go. They stepped into the elevator together, Daniel biting his tongue to keep from asking what Brian had been working on. If he seemed too curious, it would only make him easier to catch later. So, Brian said at last, made up your mind about drinks tomorrow night? Sure, Daniel replied, on an impulse. Brian raised an eyebrow. Her Highness is okay with this? Unbidden, Alan's words from the night before popped into Daniel's head. Well, looks like we need a new coder, Minami. Maybe you can get us one a little faster this time. Irritated, he replied. Minami doesn't have to put her stamp of approval on everything I do, he replied. Brian clapped him on the shoulder, grinning. That's the way to do it! I'm buying you a drink tomorrow. Get ready. I shudder to think. Heavy stance! Once he had seen Brian off, Daniel wandered around downtown for a long time while the lights came on, the neon and argon and mercury signs casting their orange, purple, blue sheen on the rain-soaked sidewalks. Finally, when the city's clock had struck 9 p.m. and the streets were filling with bar hoppers, Daniel shouldered his way through the moist crowd back to the National Department of Computing building. He squirmed a little at having to use his ID chip to unlock the door, but decided, finally, that his face would be on enough security footage anyway. If he was going to get caught, he was going to get caught, and he might as well get caught inside where it was warm and dry. Daniel was never quite sure if he liked the NDC more or less when it was empty and dark. It was never truly deserted, the sleep habits of coders being what they were, but any time after about 6, the lights turned out, unless someone activated the motion sensor, the climate control turned off, and a deep and lugubrious quiet settled over the entire enormous building. It was a draw for Daniel, between peaceful and downright creepy. When he arrived at the 35th floor, the lights snapped on one by one, revealing a maze of empty cubicles. Daniel sucked in a long breath, let it out slowly, and walked to Brian's computer. He settled into the chair and wiggled the mouse, waking up the whirring machine. "Password?" it asked. "Pandemic," Daniel typed, and after a moment of thought, the computer allowed him in. "Thank God Brian still hasn't changed his password," Daniel mused to himself. In a few moments, he had Brian's project file open. At the bottom of the list, it sat, innocuously, for all intents and purposes just like all the other projects. 9441. Daniel, in a sort of haze, opened it. "Restricted file. Password?" the computer asked. "Okay, here goes," said Daniel. "Swordfish," he typed. The loading wheel spun, the computer thought. Daniel glanced worriedly over his shoulder. When he looked back, the contents of Project 9441 lay open before him. It took him a moment to realize what he was looking at, but when he did, it sent shivers down his spine. Facial and voice recognition, rail tracking, security protocols, automatic shutdowns. It was plainly evident that this software was made to track someone, or someones, and to stop them from ever leaving the city. Keywords to flag emails were listed. Anarchy, capital, weapon, Big Brother, and, oddly, Phoenix. "Phoenix?" Daniel whispered. As he skimmed the code, the lights turned themselves back off, leaving him illuminated in the bluish glow of Brian's computer screen. And there was still more. The unfinished scraps of Brian's coding dangled at the bottom of the workspace, holding tantalizing hints before Daniel's eyes. Soon there would be a name watch on phone calls for names as yet unwritten, automated police and fire alarms in conditions as yet unspecified, and, most disturbingly, a protocol to send the Eagle into full lockdown mode when triggered by something. He would have looked longer and harder, but just then the lights flicked on. Aghast, he leapt up from Brian's seat, sending the chair rolling back into the elevator doors. Across the cubicle maze, Suzanne King was closing and locking her office door. Daniel hurriedly ducked back into the cubicle before she turned around, trying to close the project file as quickly as he could, before she reached Brian's cubicle and saw him. "Rodriguez?" Her hedge trimmer voice cut into his panic and left a raw, bleeding edge. The project file closed just too late, and he looked guiltily back at her, his stomach tying itself in knots. "Working late?" Yes, ma'am," Daniel replied, his voice even more choked than when he usually spoke to Suzanne King, painfully aware of the oddness of his lack of chair. She simply nodded once, sharply, and stalked to the elevator. As the door opened, she drummed her fingers on the back of Daniel's runaway chair, glanced back at him once, then stepped into the elevator, the doors closing with finality behind her. Daniel sagged onto the floor, his hands shaking. "That," he gasped to himself, "is the stupidest thing I've ever done." The plot thickens. But once again, thank you guys for listening, and for continuing to support this reading habit of mine, and also the writing habit of mine that continues to happen. My voice is pretty much totally worn out now because I've been reading for about 45 minutes without really taking a break. So thank you guys for watching, and hopefully I will see you in the next one. Bye!